flow, where we look at beliefs and we look at culture. And if we can do that, that's when we'll start to change culture. So that's just a little bit of an add-on before I get started. But thanks very much, and thanks Patricia for allowing me to use that. I thought it was very powerful. Thank you.
Neil, just move that mic a little bit closer.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the things I want to talk about today, I hinted on it yesterday. I'm in a fortunate position in the assistant operations role, is that I probably do most of the legwork in terms of flying with pilot candidates, instructed candidates, and also doing renewals. I'm also aptly supported by a very good team of ROCs and pilot examiners that follow us through and help us out across the country. But it gives me a very good insight into the things I see in terms of how instructors and chief instructors particularly deliver training, how it happens on the ground and how it happens in the air. And it's great. I get to see things that we can enhance and we can share, and I get to pick up things that I see somebody do well and somebody maybe not, and I try to share that information. So what I wanted to do today was have an interactive discussion, and I'll lead it with a few points, but I don't want to drive it particularly myself, of tricks of the trade. What we've got, and Ian came up to me this morning and said, look, we've got a situation that we really need to address. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, we're all getting old. Look around the room. We've all got grey hair. Well, I sort of got rid of mine because it was already too grey. I actually started going grey at 18, so I don't know what that means. But the bottom line is we are getting older, and we do have a lot of knowledge in how we achieve and deliver training. And it's important that we start to capture that, document it, and provide it in a mechanism that we can pass on to the instructors that are coming up, and we'll talk about the types of instructors that are coming up as well. So this is an opportunity to interact, to share with your colleagues around the room, tricks of the trade, things that you do, also things that you maybe don't do well or things that have caught you out. So we're going to have a look at some of those things. And what are the things that work well? What are some of the things that you do that you consistently use that you found extremely valuable in training? So I'm going to hand that over. Can we talk less? That's funny coming from me. Can we talk less to teach more? And how do we determine competency? And we sort of touched a bit on this yesterday with the syllabus. So I want to open up to the floor, so we'll have a microphone running around. Same process we've been running this morning. Jill's got the microphone over there. What are the things that you do well? Can anybody like to share a story with a training or some mechanism that they use in terms of a trick of delivery? I call it a trick, it may not be a trick, but anyone want to share some of their own personal experiences? Good on you, Ken. There's no more hats around today.
I'll break the water. Yeah, look, one of the things that I've tried is crosswind landings. There's a lot of theory about it, but there's also a lot of just straight training. So one of the things I found particularly good was, instead of just learning going from a grabbed approach to a skidded approach after your flare, I trained 3,000 foot above the ground, long approach, and grabbed approach, converted to a skidded approach, keep your alignment right, back to a grabbed approach, and do it 4 or 5 times on approach. And in that method I got a very, very low hours pilot to do his second unassisted landing, was a crosswind landing and a 20 knot wind. So it certainly helps, and it gives them 4 or 5 goes of changing from one mode of flying to another before they get down near the runway and get overloaded.
Great, yeah, the crosswind landing is a classic one. Someone might have seen it, I don't know who regularly haunts some of these forums. There was a big discussion about crosswind landing technique. Do we turn the aircraft down final? Do we skid it down final? What do we do? So yeah, good, thanks.
I would just add to that, also fly the length of the runway with the wind down. So it becomes a very situation used to be in for more than just a few seconds near the ground. And if it do get gusts, they're not thinking, I've got to put the wheel down now. They're happy to go along further even if the wind's above the crosswind component of the plane. On a long runway, you can fly along till past. It's dropped away now I can put it on.
Great point, Eugene. How are they going to learn something in 2 seconds? They need time to be exposed to that control configuration to absorb and understand that it actually works. So we have to do that. Good, thanks. Anything else? Michael?
One of the lessons that I teach, which is effects of controls, I make the students and I make GA pilots, and I make lots of pilots, fly the machine without using the rudders at all, which is a common practice with many GA pilots. And what I then do is to say, okay, now take your hands off the aileron and fly the whole aeroplane just using trim, power and rudder. And I find if I make them fly a whole trip, including joining circuit and turns, and I only let them take aileron control on final, it gives them a very good understanding of just how to use those controls, particularly the trim, and more importantly, use the rudder, which is one of the most vital controls you've got. And I've found that in the effects of controls lesson, which goes right through till they get their wings.
Thanks very much, Michael. I know Bill Grieve over in the back corner there was nodding furiously. He told me a great story where he had a student that was just not on the rudders at all. And he said, look, I think it was about 100 k's or 80 k's at cross country, wasn't it, Bill? And he flew the whole leg back and he said, okay, you're not to touch the ailerons, I've got those, and you're going to fly the whole leg, and we're going to fly just on rudder all the way back. And I think by the end of it, Bill, apart from having sore ankles or legs, he actually worked out what rudders were for. Was that right?
Made a wonderful difference.
Thanks. Yeah. Yes, sorry, Peter.
Yeah, one of the things that we do right at the very early stage, so you've got a student who's only done 3 hours, and then I tell them that their aircraft's going to become very unserviceable for the rest of their training. So what generally happens is, of a morning, we open the hangar doors, the aircraft sitting there, we make them have a good look around, step back, look at your aircraft. So they have a good look around the aircraft. We put pins or something, or drop something on the floor, part of spring, something like that, and it'll just be dropped. They'll pull the aircraft back and they've got to find the part that's missing and determine whether it's off that aircraft or another aircraft, etc. And by the end of about 15 hours, they're coming up with things that they've found all over the place, saying to us, what's this from? I go, oh, I don't know, it's out of a ballpoint pen, I think, but it's not off our aircraft, but they're picking all these things up. So it's just a little trick that we use right at the beginning, and it sort of gets them looking for the parts that might be wrong on the aircraft. It's something I think is just overlooked in a lot of cases.
I agree. One of my colleagues came up with a great statement for students. He said, there is something wrong with the aircraft. Our job as inspectors or pilots is to find what's wrong, and if we find nothing wrong, the aircraft's then right to fly. Well, we'd assume that we find everything. But start with the premise that there is something wrong. As Matt Hall says, a chronic state of unease. What's wrong with this aeroplane today? I have to find it. If I'm lucky, I won't find anything. Bill?
Yes, landing. Landing's always the problem. Flying's easy, landing's not. And 18-year-old students are easy and 65-year-old students are not. I had a 65-year-old student who was about to give it away after many hours because he could land twice quite well and half a dozen times completely blow it. And this went on month after month and he couldn't get it. And the biggest problem was direction. He could not hold that aircraft straight at the last minute. He could fly from here to Timbuktu, holding a beautiful heading and keep the aircraft straight and do everything right, but when we were on that final, he was all over the shop. In the end, I got out one day in a bit frustrated, and I grabbed a big piece of masking tape and I stuck it on the windscreen and I said, that's the front of the aircraft, not the spinner. And a week later, he was signed off and soloed. It made the world a difference, and I find that now I've had a couple of students that I've had to do that to. I choose not to do it. I want them to learn properly, but if they're having trouble, put a bit of tape on the windscreen and get them to look at that down to the end of the runway instead of over the spinner. Some of them will insist on looking over the spinner, and that's always a problem.
Who explains parallax error? And when do they do it? At what part of the training do they talk about parallax referencing? I only saw 3 hands, so can we please? 4. So don't be afraid, put your arm up. There's once more bigger. Do we all teach parallax error referencing? Do we know what I'm talking about? So when we get in the aircraft, neither of us are sitting in the middle of the aeroplane in a side-by-side configuration, different for a tandem. We need to explain to the student very clearly that their perceptual view and we're just talking about straight and level at this point in time, is different. And the first time to do it, the ideal opportunity is when we introduce taxiing, because we've got often cases, we've got a line that we can follow on the ground. So parallax referencing, I do see that, and I do a lot of instructor assessments, and as we're taxiing out, I say, pattern me through taxiing out, and they'll talk about, oh, we just taxi at this speed, and we never go faster than walking pace, and we get to the end and we line up, and I say, well, how do I, and I say, oh, can I have control? And I put the thing directly offside, and it's not in the middle. And they go, oh no, you've got to fly in the middle, you're not in the middle. And we have this big discussion. And how many students get very frustrated because they think they're doing it right, they want to impress their instructor, but there's that missing link, the light bulb moment that Bill just talked about. So we might know it, and that this is the expert to mature phase in instructing. We know how to do it. We know where it looks right to put it straight. But how do we actually teach that to the student? Yes?
Martin Hughes from Jindabyne, Alpine Aviation. I had a couple of students who, in the circuit, were spending far too much time looking at the instruments and not at the attitude. And they were chasing, because we asked them to fly accurately, or reasonably accurately to start with, at least anyway, for heights and speeds. He was spending far too much time, he was a middle-aged student, spending far too much time looking at the instruments and therefore not flying accurately. So I covered up his instruments. And I literally did it from takeoff. I said, right, you're not going to have your airspeed or your altimeter or any instrument. You're going to fly this with power plus attitude equals performance. And he said I couldn't do it, so I demonstrated it the first time, and then I made him do it himself. And I kept uncovering the instruments to say, look, you're only 5 knots out with speed, you're only 100 feet out with height because you're visually checking your height, but you're flying the aircraft far more accurately. And it worked extremely well because ultimately, obviously, I uncovered the instruments again, and then he was actually using the attitude a hell of a lot more than he was the instruments. So I just thought it was a little technique for people who do bury their heads in the cockpit.
We all do blind panel at some stage. I'd like to think everybody covers up the panel, and don't wait until it becomes a problem. I would say do it as Martin suggested. Do it as part of your actual regimented training delivery. So when you got through straight and level, that's the ideal opportunity to say, look, this is not about a numbers game. One of the things we're seeing is a lot of our instructors, and again this was brought up to me this morning, and I'll try and insert it here. 80% of the new instructor ratings that I've issued and approved in the last 12 months have been GA conversion instructors. Instructors that have been cultured in the GA system, have gone through and got a grade 3 rating, and unfortunately there's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for them. There's no job, they can't get a charter job, so they come looking over the fence to RA. Now, in a way, it's a good thing because there's very good procedures and disciplines, and they've been taught to a very disciplined standard, but they have very little time, if any, in recreational aircraft, and they bring very much a numbers philosophy to the flying of the aeroplane. Now, that's great if you're moving on instrument approaches and 3 degrees and all of that, but the issue we have is that we get, and I have seen many instructors say, mate, we want a final approach, I want to see 70 knots, and guess where their finger's pointing? At the airspeed indicator. So as a student trying to do the right thing, where am I going to look to get my reference? The airspeed indicator. So they're the sort of things that our primacies can very much invade the cockpit and invade the learning process, and thereby set about a whole process that student will go on and promulgate, and much to his demise at some stage, particularly in emergency. Colin?
Yeah, Neil, we've found quite successful where the student's looking, like you mentioned, final approach. We sort of have an attitude reference point marked on the screen, row of dots. I don't know a lot of schools that do that, but that seems to work really well because it keeps their eyes out. They're looking at the attitudes all the time. As you said, you cover the instruments, and they've got an attitude reference which they put on the numbers on the runway, and that gives them a good constant angle approach scenario. I don't know, but a lot of schools just do a glide approach. We don't sort of think that works sometimes.
And how important is it in the extra 300 column?
Yeah.
Absolutely, isn't it? So, Colin and I spent a bit of time in his extra. So, anything else, guys, and I'll move on? See one, do one, learn one. The demonstrate, monitor, coach concept. Really important that we set the frameworks for a pilot to a student to know what he should see. Circuits is really important. We often bash, and I see a lot of people getting post-circuit trauma And I think somebody just highlighted, I think Bill was talking about, particularly our older pilots and our older students. We actually have had a couple of training records presented to us and gone down and looked at training processes where there's been 30 and 40 hours in circuit with no departure, nothing, just here I am again. I'm going to bash out another 8 or 10 circuits for my hour of flying on a Saturday morning. Now, I don't know about digging trenches, but if something's broke and you keep doing the same thing, are we really thinking we're going to improve it? So we can talk at a different time about how long should you spend in circuit, but a lot of times they have never seen a circuit, and demonstrating what a good thing looks like. Show them what the end is to start with. This is where we want to end up. This is the level that we'll get you to, so they can actually see and visualise what a good circuit looks like. So we do it in terms of the fundamental elements, I'm sure, but do we do it when we start to pull all these elements together in terms of the complex repetition exercise, which is the circuit, and how do we break that up? Control orientation. My mate John up here, we get a few GA converts that want to, for cost reasons or adventure reasons, want to move over to Group B or flying a weight shift aircraft. The bar goes the wrong way. It's all opposite. It's all different. I don't know how to fly these things. And we've actually had situations where we've had to really watch for this primacy, that it creeps back in. For a very experienced pilots, some of them are quite experienced reactors pilots, do we teach people to fly the wing? When we actually slow the aeroplane down, do we get them to look out and visualise and see the angle or relative angle of attack? Do we actually reference that it's the wing we're flying with the elevator effectively? And get that visual connection, that strong connection in the training, that these are the things. Any thoughts? Any comments? Doug?
Just on that one there, Neil, I think one thing that I've definitely recognised amongst instructors and students, especially dealing with a lot of GA instructors as well, converting them to ROs, is the incorrect correlation between attitude and angle of attack. A lot of people think that this attitude equals this angle of attack, so that's one area in stall stick position and correlating speed with the stall. I think that's one big problem across the whole industry, especially coming from the GA down as well. That's something that we need to address.
Absolutely, and if 80% of our new instructors, the ones coming in, guys, to replace us in their 30s and even in their 20s, have got this mindset, and we've all grown up as great stick and rudder pilots and worked through it for 20, 30 years in some cases or more. What threats have we got in terms of our training delivery to overcome and mitigate some of these things, and yet at the same time embrace some of the benefits that come? So it's a good point, Doug. Yeah. Anything else? Big picture, small picture. I think it comes out a lot in navigation, you know, fly the big picture. Are we heading on the right track? Are we roughly on the right time? I've actually had horror stories of, I actually took somebody out to finish off their nav endorsement, and we went to a place where there were 3 very similar towns, and all the guys in South East Queensland will probably know what I'm talking about. They all look fairly similar. It's a perfect place to see if somebody can actually triangulate reference in terms of orientation and what the right town is. And I could see the guy stressing out, and he was making a mistake. He picked up an airfield about 8 miles south of the one we were really wanting to get to, and he kept doing what most students do, convince themselves that that was the right one. And it came out. He said, when he found it and we went through the process of self-discovery, he said, you know, I've never been here before, but I did come out here to do a nav. And I said, how come you didn't arrive at the... Oh, well, the instructor didn't know where he was. Really? Yeah, so... You know, we are the stewards of standards, guys, so if you're not sure about any processes and the delivery, well, you know, you're almost imminently going to fail in terms of delivery. Rules of thumb. Who's got some good rules of thumb? We talk about rules of thumb, builders use them all the time. Anyone got some good rules of thumb stories? Simple things that make it easy for students to recognise things?
Yeah.
Yep, Ed?
Yeah, the old 3-degree
Just
approach numbers.
Hang on a minute, Ed. We'll get you a 3-degree microphone.
Yeah, the old rule of thumb's a really handy one for early landing practice. Teach them the old 3-degree approach numbers. I'm surprised at how many people don't know them. But 5 times your airspeed in knots is your feet per minute to descend. If you want a 3-degree approach, doesn't matter at what speed you're doing, those numbers work. And the beauty of doing that with students is that less than looking out the window, you can call off their descent numbers while they maintain their attitude. And they get the feel of what a decent, easily managed landing really looks like. They get a nice stable approach, and you can use your simple rule of thumb. If you're down below your approach slope, add a bit of power. If you're above it, take a bit of power off. And you guide them through that little exercise, and you find that you get them into decent landings fairly early.
You sort of segued in a little bit to my last point on this slide, and I won't jump too far ahead, but the simple concept of people understanding glide slope control, do they reference an aiming point? Are they seeing the movement of the aircraft, the relative movement of the aircraft to that aiming point? And are they seeing it from base leg, not just final? Are they actually adapting their circuit to modify it, to maintain? This becomes more important with the glide approach, as we all know. But what sort of rules of thumb? The bottom one is a simple one. If you're low, if the aiming point's moving up, you need to power up. If the aiming point's moving down, you need to power down. It's simple verbalisation that sits across a visual reference that they're seeing. So just matching, that's the next stage of art, as we all know, is in matching that very finite, limited pattern that's appropriate to the element so that the student gets a very good, solid foundation in what he's actually trying to do. Anything else? Anyone got any other jewels? I've only got one, and I actually, funnily enough, I think I've been doing it my whole life, flying gliders when I was a young kid and everything, but it took me a while. We have a general, in gliding we have a general rule. Under 2,000 feet you should have at least 3 paddocks picked out, and you should have 1 as your primary. So we start down this cone of options, I guess, in terms of pre-selection for outlandings. And I just developed what we call, I guess, a pilot's eye, and I always knew what paddock was big enough. And I've heard various incantations. Well, if we're talking the 6S's or WAS, how do we know that that paddock's okay to land in? Oh, well, it's got to be this, and it's got to be that, and it's got to be that. And I said, yeah, but how are you going to teach the student that? He's a 2-dimensional creature. We're trying to teach him to be a 3-dimensional creature. So this reference, this perspective view of how something is big enough, let alone slope or what the surface is like. And I started playing with it in terms of how do you develop a reference. And it wasn't a rule of thumb, it was a rule of hand. If you put your hand out the side and you put it out and the paddock's bigger than your hand at 2,000 feet, which is that height where these decisions start becoming important, bigger than your hand, big enough to land. It's a very simple mantra. And go and try it. Next time you're out and you're doing PFLs and precautionaries or whatever you're thinking, just go out and put your hand out and just hold it out to the side. And I guarantee you, if you can find a big... Now, 10,000 feet, well, we can land a 747 if we applied that rule. At 2,000 feet, it basically works pretty well. And I've used it with a lot of instructors. Who's been with me in the cockpit where we've actually done that, I think? Perhaps Steve? Yeah, I've used that a few times and it's like, oh, yeah, that does work. And of course then you see the hand moving around. So go and practice it, have a look. Just want to have a look at I'll probably frame this before I start this slide. The power for airspeed, attitude for airspeed equation. Let's just get the elephant in the room. Who thinks power is our primary control? Who thinks power is our primary control for airspeed? Great. Who thinks attitude is our primary control for airspeed? Great. Who thinks that a combination of power and attitude gives us an ultimate outcome in terms of the flight path of the aircraft? Great. Okay. I want to put this demo on. We were going to present it last year. Jill and I were actually going to do a bit of a stand-up routine. But I actually had the opportunity this year, and I've had a few opportunities to do it with a number of pilots. And the ones that it seems to really work with, again, is our GA instructors that have been driven very much down a 3-degree approach formula in final, and they apply that methodology across the whole speed envelope, not just in the landing phase. So I'm going to pop that up for a moment.
Hey, while we're just getting out there, just give me a straight level at various airspeeds. Okay. Well, say reps or Q cut to the circuit there, we want to slow down the Q in front of us.
Technical issue?
Every time you plug this thing back in, you've got to reprogram it.